The galaxy knew only one law: the strong devour the weak. For countless ages, that truth had belonged to the apex predators who carved their path of conquest across spiral arms without hesitation. They were more than conquerors, they were annihilators. Where their fleets descended, civilizations disappeared. No records, no survivors, no lingering ruins, only silence. Their legacy was written in void and ash. Entire species, some with histories stretching back millions of years, had been erased without a trace, reduced to a footnote in whispers carried by fleeing merchants or salvagers too small to matter. The predators were not a single empire but a consortium of fear. Their kind had evolved on death worlds, where survival meant tearing apart competitors before being torn apart in turn. From birth, they had been forged in the certainty that fear was weakness, mercy was stupidity, and hesitation was death. Each child learned to stalk before they could stand. Their biology was built for destruction: dense muscle, armored hides, claws sharp enough to shear alloy. Their minds were honed for relentless pursuit. They feared nothing because they had never been forced to fear. In battle, their fleets were extensions of their own brutal nature. No finesse, no artistry, only overwhelming force applied with clinical precision. Swarms of warships darkened skies, their weapons vaporizing defenses before the defenders could even register what descended upon them. They thrived on spectacle, bombardments that split continents, orbital sieges that stripped atmospheres. The psychological warfare was almost more effective than their weapons. Worlds often surrendered before the first shot, for the mere sight of the predator's sigil in the heavens meant the end had come. The predators saw themselves as nature perfected. To them, the galaxy was nothing more than a chain of meals waiting to be consumed. If one world resisted, another 10 would fall the same day. If one prey species dared bare its teeth, it was punished with extinction, ensuring others remembered their place. Their victories bred not arrogance but certainty. They considered themselves the final word in predation, the end state of evolution's climb. To be hunted by them was a natural inevitability. They built nothing lasting because they believed permanence was weakness. Cities were temporary waypoints, fleets were meant to burn bright and then be reforged. They consumed not only flesh and resources but entire cultures, erasing them as though they had never existed. Their archives held trophies, not history, skulls of ancient kings, databanks filled with the dying cries of conquered species, shattered relics kept as reminders of those who once thought themselves mighty. They gloried in being the universal terror, the story mothers whispered to children in the dark. Yet, for all their dominance, there lingered a strange emptiness at their core. They had faced countless civilizations, but none had truly challenged them in ways they could not comprehend. Resistance was always brief, always predictable. Every species followed the same arc: shock, defiance, desperation, and eventual submission. Some burned their own worlds rather than kneel, but the predators considered that no victory, only wasted meat. There was no surprise left for them in conquest. It was whispered in trading enclaves that their fleets moved more slowly now, not because of weakness but because their hunger for fear had dulled. Victories came too easily. Even among the predators there were those who muttered that the galaxy was already theirs, that all that remained was waiting for the embers of resistance to flicker out. They had reached the peak of domination, and discovered it barren. Then came the rumor. It was nothing at first, carried on half-dead merchant freighters fleeing obscure corners of space. Whispers of a small, fragile species that fought differently. Not stronger, not more advanced, not more numerous. But different. These reports were ignored by predator war councils at first, dismissed as the ramblings of prey desperate to invent heroes. After all, what could be stranger than weakness pretending at strength? Yet the rumors persisted, stubborn as smoke after fire. A species on a blue and green cradle world, expanding outward in fragile tinkin ships, colonizing barren moons and frozen asteroids with sheer stubbornness. What unsettled the predators was not the claim of human strength, but the suggestion that fear had no hold on them. Fear was the predators' greatest weapon, the shadow they cast long before the fleets arrived. If prey could not be broken by terror, then conquest became less certain. And though no predator would ever admit it aloud, the idea of prey immune to fear was enough to plant a a seed that festered with unease. In the grand halls where predator leaders gathered, some laughed at the thought. Others sharpened their claws in silence. For the first time in living memory, they debated not how quickly conquest would end, but whether it might not end at all. The galaxy had always belonged to those who feared nothing. Now, for the first time, the predators began to wonder if they had finally found something they should. When the predator scouts first encountered humanity, they expected nothing more than another entry in their long ledger of conquests. The humans seemed almost laughably unprepared, frail bodies with no natural armor, no claws or fangs, skin so soft that even an animal from their own world could shred it. Their ships were patchwork vessels, crude compared to the engineered monstrosities the predators commanded. To the predators, it was the simplest calculation: weakness meant prey, prey meant consumption, and consumption meant victory. The first fleet dispatched to a human colony arrived confident that it would be over before dusk. They descended expecting submission, but what they found unsettled them in ways they could not define. The humans did not cower. Instead of pleading for mercy or offering tribute, they resisted immediately. Their defense was not organized in the grand, uniform sense the predators were used to from more advanced prey civilizations. It was chaotic, improvisational, and disturbingly effective. Human forces did not meet them with lines of battle. They fought from shadows, from shattered buildings, from beneath the very ground. Explosives were hidden in places no predator would have expected, under roadways, inside abandoned storage tanks, even in the carcasses of vehicles that seemed already destroyed. Every street was a snare, every structure a weapon. The predators' warriors found themselves bleeding and burning in circumstances they could not predict. What unnerved the predators most was not the humans' tactics but their mindset. Prey was supposed to flee, to scatter when cornered. Humans did not scatter. They regrouped, they struck again, they chose death rather than surrender. Predator psychology, forged on the certainty that terror guaranteed victory, faltered when that terror failed to take hold. Humans showed an indifference to fear that was not recklessness but something deeper, an acceptance of sacrifice as part of survival. Reports filtered back from the first clashes. Individual humans fought with a ferocity completely out of proportion to their size. A wounded soldier would hold position long enough for others to retreat, fighting with improvised weapons when ammunition ran dry. Civilians, supposedly helpless, became part of the struggle, denying predators the easy consumption of populations. Entire colonies refused to collapse, even when reduced to rubble. The predators had seen desperation before, but this was different. There was calculation in it, a willingness to adapt to circumstances rather than submit to inevitability. Predator commanders grew frustrated. Their fleets should have crushed resistance in hours, but days stretched into weeks. The humans refused to offer decisive battles, slipping away only to strike at supply lines, ambush patrols, and sabotage installations. The predators' war doctrine was built on overwhelming strength applied quickly, and for the first time that doctrine faltered. They could win every direct encounter, but the cost was rising beyond expectations. They were being bled, not by superior weapons or numbers, but by ingenuity and relentlessness. In councils of war, commanders struggled to explain their losses without admitting fear. They spoke of human unpredictability, of their uncanny ability to exploit weaknesses the predators themselves did not realize they had. No two encounters with humans were ever the same. They adapted within days, sometimes hours, turning previous defeats into lessons. The predators had never faced prey that learned so quickly or so ruthlessly. Even more alarming was the humans' motivation. They did not fight merely for themselves. Predator intelligence reports noted again and again that humans risked everything to protect one another. They fought not as individuals seeking survival, but as collectives determined to preserve every last life they could. This made them dangerous in ways the predators could scarcely comprehend. To fight without fear of death was one thing. To fight because another's life mattered more than your own was entirely alien. The predators attempted to escalate, deploying heavier weapons and more troops, expecting sheer brutality to break resistance. Yet each escalation brought new human responses. Where plasma bombardments scarred the land, humans tunneled underground. Where fleets enforced blockades, humans used stealth shuttles and improvised cloaking measures to slip through. Every attempt to corner them revealed yet another layer of creativity and stubbornness. Slowly, a realization crept into predator strategy circles, one that no leader wanted to admit aloud. These humans were not prey. They lacked the submission, the predictable patterns, the instinct to fold under overwhelming force. They were something else entirely, something the predators had no word for. A commander described them in a private transmission as fragile predators, creatures who wore the skin of the weak but carried the hearts of hunters. The initial campaign, expected to last days, stretched into months. Victories became hollow, as for every settlement razed, new resistance sprang up elsewhere. Predator warriors, bred to feel no fear, began to hesitate at the thought of engaging humans in close quarters. The stories spread among them, of humans who would not die quietly, of traps so cunning they seemed like madness, of enemies who seemed to draw strength from suffering rather than succumb to it. The predators had entered human space expecting to feast. Instead, they had found an enemy who defied every law they believed immutable. Humanity was not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most advanced. Yet they were the first to force the galaxy's predators to ask a question that had never before crossed their minds. What happens when prey refuses to be prey at all? The predators had always relied on the simplicity of force. To them, conflict was a matter of overwhelming power, applied without hesitation until the enemy cracked. Against humanity, that certainty fractured. What had begun as small disruptions soon transformed into a sustained war fought in the shadows, where victory was no longer measured by territory seized but by which side endured the longest. Humanity, outnumbered and outgunned, chose endurance as their weapon. Where fleets of predators sought to dominate open space, humans turned the very environment into their ally. Asteroid fields became ambush zones. Derelict ships were rigged with explosives and left adrift, waiting for curious patrols to investigate. A single damaged transport, seemingly abandoned, would detonate with enough force to cripple a predator cruiser. Each victory the predators claimed seemed to cost them more than it should, as if every step forward dragged them into another trap laid by minds that refused to yield. The predators had no defense against unpredictability. Their doctrine demanded control, but humans thrived in chaos. No pattern could be discerned in their actions, no reliable countermeasure applied. They fought with the same creativity they had shown in their first encounters, but now honed by necessity and rage. Technology they salvaged from fallen predator ships was twisted into new forms. Weapons that should have been impossible for prey species appeared in their arsenals. Predator armor plating was reforged into human fortifications. Even discarded predator tools were reshaped into instruments of resistance. Every loss humanity suffered was transformed into fuel for their survival. Stories spread among predator warriors, whispered even though silence was demanded. Tales of human squads that fought until no one remained, holding positions long after defeat should have been assured. Legends of colonists who refused evacuation, instead engineering devastating traps that destroyed entire predator detachments. Accounts of fleets that appeared too small to matter, only to manipulate gravity wells and debris into annihilating much larger predator armadas. None of these events, alone, changed the course of the war, but together they eroded the predator's most valuable weapon, certainty. Fear, once the predator's greatest tool, shifted sides. Their warriors began to dread the quiet, because silence often preceded disaster. Every seemingly abandoned station might conceal explosives. Every message intercepted might be bait. The predators who prided themselves on fearing nothing found themselves hesitating before advancing, second-guessing each maneuver. Humanity had introduced doubt into a mind that had never known it. Even in moments where predators secured victories, the humans denied them satisfaction. Cities reduced to rubble still produced resistance cells. Entire populations relocated into wildernesses, refusing capture, emerging only to strike when least expected. The predators had exterminated species before, but none had been so willing to survive in fragments rather than surrender whole. This persistence, this refusal to vanish, was alien to them. The predators began to study humans with a desperation that bordered on obsession. They catalogued their biology, their psychology, their history. What they found only deepened their unease. Humans were creatures that had always lived on the edge of extinction, shaped by an environment of endless competition and disaster. They had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars against themselves that rivaled the scale of any galactic conflict. For predators who believed themselves unrivaled in savagery, the realization that humanity's greatest enemy had always been humanity was profoundly unsettling. And so the War of Shadows dragged on, not defined by decisive battles but by 1,000 small cuts. Predator fleets continued to advance, but each advance came slower, bloodier. Their resources stretched thin not because of overwhelming resistance, but because of constant attrition. They had never faced an opponent who could make losing look like winning, who could turn retreat into a lure, who could convince even their conquerors that every step forward was a mistake. For the first time, Predator commanders met to discuss not how to celebrate victory but how to prevent collapse. Their warriors grew restless, morale strained by fighting enemies who seemed to become stronger the more they were pressed. The predators had always assumed their prey would break under pressure, but the humans revealed a terrifying truth: pressure was what refined them. The more they suffered, the sharper they became. Whispers spread across the fleets, too quiet for leaders to acknowledge but too persistent to silence. The humans were not prey. They were something else, something new and incomprehensible. They fought like predators, but without the selfish hunger that had defined every other dominant species. They fought for one another, for ideas, for futures beyond the moment. In that realization lay the predators' first taste of true fear. They had once believed nothing in the galaxy could stand against them. Now they understood they were not facing fragile creatures to be consumed, but an enemy who turned weakness into strength, suffering into strategy, and death into defiance. The predators had stumbled into a war they no longer understood, and in their confusion, one unshakable truth emerged: humanity was teaching them what it meant to be hunted. What began as survival soon shifted into something greater. Humanity, once scattered and barely holding on, began to unify with a clarity that the predators had never anticipated. Colonies that had been fractured by distance and politics drew together under the shared memory of blood spilled. Leaders who once argued over borders now directed their energy towards strategy, resource sharing, and collective defense. From the ashes of desperation arose coordination, and with coordination came the shift from endurance to counterattack. Human ingenuity, long underestimated, became a weapon sharper than any blade. Where the predators relied on brute force, humans weaponized imagination. Captured predator vessels were reverse-engineered and turned back against their creators. Entire systems of communication were infiltrated, their signals corrupted until predator fleets received false orders that led them into ambushes or left them stranded without reinforcements. Supply lines, once considered untouchable, collapsed under carefully orchestrated strikes carried out by fleets that should not have been able to survive in open combat. Every advance the predators made was matched by human ingenuity that transformed weakness into an edge. The predators, used to prey that either broke or vanished, had no framework for understanding what they now faced. Their attempts at escalation only worsened their situation. When they deployed heavier war machines, humans learned how to disable them with improvised electromagnetic fields. When they attempted to starve out colonies, humans adapted by harnessing barren environments, pulling sustenance from ice, gas, or even the predator's own discarded rations. A species that had once seemed fragile revealed itself as impossible to exhaust. What most unsettled the predators was the scale of human daring. They no longer confined themselves to defending ground or evading annihilation. They began striking deep into predator territory, with operations that seemed insane but succeeded through sheer audacity. One campaign lured a predator fleet into the path of a collapsing star, sacrificing human ships in the process, but obliterating an armada that had once terrorized entire regions. Another used hijacked predator codes to gain entry into fortified installations, only to tear them apart from within. The galaxy, long resigned to predator domination, began to notice. Species that had once submitted without question now watched humanity's rise with a mix of awe and disbelief. For them, humans were proof that resistance was not only possible but contagious. Whispers spread from system to system. The predators were not invincible, and the example of humanity's defiance inspired movements of rebellion in corners the predators thought secure. The predators had always ruled through fear, but fear was no longer theirs to command. In predator war councils, panic replaced confidence. The strategies that had served them for millennia now seemed brittle. They had been masters of inevitability, yet humans shattered inevitability with unpredictability. Worst of all, the predators recognized a pattern they could not unsee. The humans were evolving within the conflict itself. Every battle, every defeat, every loss refined them further. Their ships grew faster, their weapons more efficient, their strategies more ruthless. They did not merely endure pressure, they transformed under it. The predators found themselves trapped by their own arrogance. They had awakened a force that could not be returned to slumber. Humanity was no longer merely surviving, it was ascending. The more the predators pressed, the clearer it became that humans thrived under the weight of impossible odds. Each sacrifice was willingly made, each victory magnified by the determination to ensure none of it was in vain. The predators had never fought an enemy who treated existence itself as something to be claimed, not begged for. Even in their darkest moments, humans revealed a truth the predators struggled to comprehend. They fought not for conquest, not for dominance, but for the right to choose their own future. That purpose gave them strength beyond calculation. For predators who measured all life by consumption and power, the idea of fighting for something intangible was alien. It was also terrifying. By the time predator leaders fully grasped the scale of the threat, it was too late. Humanity had turned the tide. No longer a fragile species clinging to survival, they had become the one opponent the predators could not subdue. The galaxy had shifted. Where once the predators had been feared without question, now their own warriors hesitated, knowing that humanity was waiting in the dark with weapons forged of resilience, ingenuity, and a will that would not break. The predators had believed themselves the galaxy's final word. Humanity had shown them they were only a chapter, and the story was being rewritten in blood, defiance, and unrelenting resolve. For the first time in their existence, the predators looked upon another species and understood they were not the hunters anymore. They had unleashed something they could never conquer, something that could not be consumed. They had created their own reckoning. The war ended not with a decisive battle but with a shift that could no longer be denied. The predators, who had once treated the galaxy as their hunting ground, began to pull back. Not because their fleets were utterly destroyed, but because the cost of pursuing humanity had grown unbearable. For every victory claimed, a dozen new threats appeared. Every attempt to crush resistance seemed to create more of it. Humanity had achieved something no other species had. They had forced the apex predators to reconsider the very foundation of their dominance. In the aftermath, predator leaders abandoned campaigns they had once declared eternal. Their forces retreated to secure territories, consolidating power instead of expanding it. Outwardly, they justified this as a strategic pause, but beneath the facade lay a truth that echoed across the stars. They feared humanity, not for size, not for weapons, but for what could not be quantified. They feared their will. The galaxy, long accustomed to silence under predator rule, felt the tremors of change. Species that had resigned themselves to being footnotes in a cycle of conquest now saw in humanity a reason to believe that survival was possible. The courage of one defiant species became a contagion of defiance. Small insurrections ignited in regions once considered pacified, fueled by the idea that the predators could bleed, and that their fearlessness was an illusion. Humanity had not just defended itself, it had shifted the balance of power for countless others. What marked humanity apart was not technological supremacy or sheer numbers. It was their refusal to be broken, even when defeat seemed inevitable. They embraced suffering as fuel, turned loss into strategy, and endured hardship with a resilience no predator could match. While others saw devastation as the end, humans treated it as a beginning, using it to forge strength where none should have existed. That refusal to surrender created a legend more powerful than any weapon they wielded. For predators bred to dominate, this legend was unbearable. They had thrived on the certainty that prey would always bend or die. Yet here was a species that bent but did not break, died but did not disappear. Humans fought not for conquest but for each other, and that made them a force beyond calculation. A single death might inspire 10 more to take up the fight. A single colony's fall might unite dozens more. The predators, for the first time, were forced to confront the idea of limits. In the centuries that followed, predators altered their behavior. No longer did their fleets descend indiscriminately. No longer did they annihilate without thought. Some began to pursue uneasy truces, cloaking fear in the language of diplomacy. Others avoided human space entirely, unwilling to risk encounters that history had proven costly. The invincible had learned caution, and in that caution lay the deepest admission of all. Humanity had earned their respect, though they would never speak the word aloud. For humanity, survival became more than survival. They emerged scarred, their worlds bearing the marks of fire and ruin, but they stood unbroken. In those scars lay pride, the knowledge that they had done what no other species had. They had forced predators who once feared nothing to recognize limits, to doubt their supremacy. Humanity had rewritten the unspoken law of the galaxy. No longer was it certain that the strong would always devour the weak. Now there existed a new truth: the weak could endure long enough to become strong, and strength born from endurance was more terrifying than power born from dominance. Across the stars, tales spread in whispers and proclamations alike. The predators, once the universal nightmare, became the subject of stories not of fear, but of warning. Children of countless species grew up hearing of the fragile beings who had refused to bow, who had taught terror itself to flinch. Among humans, the phrase became a promise, a reminder etched into their identity. Predators had feared nothing, until they met them. This was the true victory. Not the battles won, nor the territories reclaimed, but the transformation of memory and myth. The predators could retreat, recover, even attempt to strike again in the future, but they would never return as they once were. They had been marked. Their aura of inevitability shattered, their reputation forever altered. To meet humans was to understand that the galaxy's prey was no longer prey. In the silence after war, humanity stood as both a symbol and a warning. To allies, they were proof that resistance mattered, that survival was possible even against impossible odds. To enemies, they were a reminder that some species could not be consumed, that fire burned brighter under pressure, and that strength could come from fragility. For themselves, they were neither saviors nor conquerors, but survivors who had chosen to shape their destiny rather than accept annihilation. The predators had once believed they were eternal. Humanity proved eternity could be broken. And in the shadow of that revelation, the galaxy learned a lesson it would never forget. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who strikes hardest, but the one who never yields. Humanity had become that enemy, and their legend would echo long after the war itself faded.